name is Pepe Berger, and I'm here to say that we Grannies are outraged that oil trains are allowed to move through our town and endanger our lives. Oil trains are an example of how corporate greed puts profit ahead of the health and safety of whole communities.
Good evening, Mayor Piercy, councilors, city staff. My name is Patty Hine. I live in the county, and I call Eugene my home. I am here tonight on behalf of 350 Eugene, Beyond Toxics, and the Many Rivers chapter of the Oregon Sierra Club. We bring to you for your consideration a resolution opposing crude oil by rail. In the packets that you have before you, those envelopes, you will find a resolution summary, the full resolution, a background explanatory memo, and a crude by rail information sheet. Tonight, members of our coalition will read the resolution in its entirety and provide a bit of background. We submit this testimony with these documents for inclusion in future Eugene City Council work sessions, follow-up, and adoption. Our coalition is proud to work with the city and our community leaders to bring about the quickest possible transition away from a fossil fuel-based economy and lifestyle to a healthier, safer, cleaner, more sustainable, just and broadly inclusive prosperity for everyone. This resolution is solidly in keeping with our binding climate recovery ordinance passed in April 2014, as well as state, national, and international goals to reduce greenhouse gas pollution, to remain below 1.5 degrees Celsius average global temperature, to avert the worst effects of climate change, including sea level rise, ocean acidification, drought, loss of biodiversity, and extreme weather, to name a few. We live in extraordinary times. While spared so far from many of the negative effects of climate change here in the global north, we see the destabilizing results of crop failures, floods, and storms. Many of the things we have come to expect and taken for granted are coming unhinged. We live in these times. You govern in these times. In response, people and their governments must change our business as usual approach to solving our problems. We believe Eugene is a leader. We are proud in this community, and we know this change will originate locally. Thank you for being a leader and for your attention in this matter regarding crude by rail. We would appreciate your support for this symbolic resolution, joining dozens of communities in our region. Thank you.
Roger Snyder is up next, followed by Joel Iboa.
Good evening. My name is Joshua Schneider, and I live in Ward 1. No crude oil by rail resolution. Resolution opposing transport by rail of hazardous fossil fuel materials, including crude oil specifically through Eugene. Whereas the people of the city of Eugene realize that the continued burning of fossil fuels is causing planetary warming and that such climate change is a threat to all life on this planet. Whereas the people of the city of Eugene recognize that we all have a duty to stop the warming of the planet and to safeguard the health and safety of all Eugene residents. Whereas the people of the city of Eugene have the right to public safety, health, and welfare, which includes the right to be free from the danger of explosion or fire from railway cars carrying crude oil. And whereas trains carrying crude oil from the Bakken Shale Formation in Canada and North Dakota and the Canadian tar sands in Alberta, Canada, to refinery and export facilities in California currently pass through downtown Eugene along the Union Pacific rail tracks. Whereas these tracks also run through neighboring communities directly by the University of Oregon along waterways, including the Willamette River, through densely populated areas, sensitive environments, and productive agricultural land. And whereas these types of crude oil are highly volatile and flammable, more so than other crude oils, and are known to contain elevated concentrations of benzene, a potent carcinogen. And whereas shipments of crude oil by rail in the US increased over 50-fold from 9,500 carloads in 2008 to almost 500,000 in 2014. And whereas transport of crude oil by rail through Oregon and Eugene can be expected to continue and possibly increase further because of future oil and gas company decisions and market forces. And whereas the enormous increase in transport of crude oil by rail has been accompanied by a similar rise in spills and accidents, reaching a high of 141 in 2014, more crude oil was spilled in US rail accidents in 2013, more than 1.5 million gallons, than in the preceding 4 decades. And whereas in July 2013, 72 tanker cars loaded with 2 million gallons of flammable crude oil derailed in Lac-Mégantic, Quebec, causing explosions that killed 47 people and caused $1 billion in damage. Thank you.
Joe Laboe is next, followed by Joan Fleeman.
Good afternoon. My name is Joey Watt. I live in Ward 7 in Whitaker. I'm glad to be here in front of you today representing Beyond Toxics and in partnership with 350.org and Oregon Sierra Club. Get ready for more whereases. Whereas in June 2016, 4 trains carrying crude oil derailed coming through the Columbia River Gorge in the town of Mosier, Oregon, and caught fire, prompting evacuation of residents, schools, and businesses, and damaged the local water supply, sewer system, and soil. And whereas in September 2016, 13 cars derailed here in Eugene, including one containing highly flammable liquefied petroleum gas. And whereas hauling crude oil into Oregon involves traversing some of the most challenging mountain passes, areas laced with earthquake faults, and numerous unsafe old steel and timber bridges over main waterways that supply drinking water to communities, greatly increasing the probability of serious accidents and grave consequences to Oregonians. And whereas crude oil is being transported in significant volumes across the US and Canada in structurally deficient rail cars, including rail cars designated as DOT 111 rail tank cars originally designed to haul corn syrup. DOT promulgated updated safety specifications for cars and transport regulation along rail lines, but the phase-in of these standards has been slow, haphazard, and severely undersupervised, so that many of these unsafe cars are still in use. And whereas federal regulations for shipping companies meant to improve rail safety for crude oil transport and to provide worst-case scenario emergency response plans will not be in place until 2018 or later. And whereas Eugene is not advised of the times and number of cars loaded with oil moving through the city, and the rail carriers are not required to notify state officials unless more than 1 million gallons of oil is being transported on a single train, although devastating, accidents have occurred with much lesser volumes. And whereas increased rail traffic in Oregon from crude oil will lead to an increase in diesel emissions and particulate matter in communities along rail lines, and exposure to such emissions can cause serious health hazards, especially in children. And whereas historically, when environmental accidents do occur, oil companies spend years in litigation over damages, a strategy to undercut payments to affected communities or deflect blame. And whereas other states and communities have also recognized the risk of crude oil transport by rail and have called for comprehensive reviews of safety procedures and emergency response preparedness, limitations on increases in capacity in transport, and/or have passed resolutions in opposition to transporting crude by rail.
Well timed.
Thank you.
And following her is Catherine Hunt.
Joan Fleeman, Ward 1. From 1991 to 2014, I owned and operated a retail business at 515 High Street, adjacent to the UP rail tracks. Continuing, whereas opposing crude oil by rail through Eugene community would align Eugene's climate recovery ordinance, the cumulative impacts of the crude oil traffic through Eugene and other parts of Oregon, in addition to the cumulative upstream and downstream greenhouse gas impacts of these fossil fuels, must be analyzed prior to the transport of any of those hazardous materials through our communities. And now, therefore, be it resolved that the City of Eugene City Council opposes using existing Union Pacific rail lines to transport hazardous crude oil through Eugene and other populated areas in Willamette Valley and along the Oregon waterways, and resolve to 1, file comments opposing any Oregon Department of Eugene Quality DEQ documents and draft permits approvals such as air permit, zoning changes for transport of crude as they occur, including the comments, a statement that any DEQ analysis by a lead agency must fully account for the direct, indirect, and cumulative impacts associated with proposals for crude oil transport and export. 2, to submit a copy of this resolution to Governor Brown, whereby the City of Eugene requests that Governor Brown, A, take executive action similar to New York Governor Cuomo's executive order directing state agencies to conduct a comprehensive review of safety procedures and emergency response preparedness related to shipments of volatile crude oil, and B, order a cumulative impact analysis similar to the Washington Department of Ecology for coal mining, transport, and burning. 3, address impacts to public health, public safety, property, air quality, and surface and groundwater caused by crude oil through Eugene by actively enforcing applicable local public health, public safety, building, electrical, nuisance, and fire codes by actively enforcing applicable federal environmental statutes that are delegated to Eugene. Number 4, submit a letter to rail carriers involving in the transport of crude oil through Eugene and the Willamette Valley, requesting that these rail carriers, A, make public any plans for new or expanded rail facilities or significant rail traffic volume increases. B, provide representatives to meet periodically with local citizen groups and local government officials. C, update UP's emergency response plan with the City of Eugene to account for the transport of crude oil and the potential emergencies that could occur with accidents involving these hazardous materials. And D, conduct environmental monitoring in Eugene, including but not limited to groundwater and air monitoring, and submit monitoring and testing information to local government entities on a monthly basis for 10 years. Thank you.
Catherine Hunt is next, followed by Jim New.
Good evening, my name is Catherine Hunt. I live on Hanson Lane, which is part of Lane County, though Eugene is my home. Number 5, submit a copy of this resolution to the Oregon Public Utilities Commission, whereby the City of Eugene seeks assurances that the OPUC Railroad Safety Program is adequately implemented in Eugene and other areas that may receive crude by rail shipments, including investigation, inspection, infrastructure improvement, detection and mitigation risks, or any other procedures or mechanisms available to the Oregon Public Utilities Commission. And 6, send a copy of this resolution to the Oregon Department of Transportation, which is developing regulations for federal rail safety of shipment of fossil fuels by rail in DOT 111 rail cars. And 7, alert and communicate with other cities along the transportation route Eugene's resolution opposing crude oil by rail, and support their efforts to take similar action. And number 8, work through the Oregon League of Cities, Oregon Association of Counties, and other relevant organizations to explain Eugene's opposition to crude oil trains. And number 9, alert Eugene's state legislative representatives and our lobbyists in Salem to this resolution opposing crude oil trains and enlist their help in addressing the many safety concerns raised herein. And number 10, City of Eugene will lobby federal senators and representatives to enlist their help to engage the appropriate regulatory authorities at the federal level.
Jim New is next, followed by Dylan Thompson.
Jim New, I live in Ward 7, representing 350 Eugene. In closing, adopting a resolution opposing crude oil by rail aligns with the City of Eugene's vision and laws, the Climate Recovery Ordinance, and the Community Climate and Energy Action Plan. This resolution symbolically takes a stand against the fossil fuel industry's transportation of hazardous materials through the city's residential and business districts. Not only is this a public health and safety issue when it comes to explosions of volatile liquids being transported in deficient rail cars, a threat of oil spills and polluting the air and drinking water, but it is an environmental and social injustice to the residents of this community. Recently, this council adopted a resolution in support of the Standing Rock Sioux North Dakota Access Pipeline Resistance. Currently, Council Member Zelenka, at the request of the mayor and council, is forming a mayor ad hoc committee to review the Community Climate Energy Action Plan to establish public support and implementation of the benchmarks of the CEAP. We thank you for these efforts. Now, more than ever, local groups and cities must work together to push for climate progress where the federal government falls short. The committed volunteer authors and supporters of this resolution request the council adopt this resolution in a timely manner and keep the community informed as to the progress of the 10 action items the document addresses in communicating with other cities, state, and federal representatives. 350 Eugene, Beyond Toxics, and Many Rivers chapter of the Oregon Sierra Club welcome city comments, questions, and feedback. And we thank the mayor and council for your attention and consideration in adopting this resolution. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, councilors, Manager Ruiz. My name is Lori Powell. I live in Ward 1 and I'm here with 350 Eugene. So what do the Climate Recovery Ordinance, No Crude by Rail Resolution, Oregon's No LNG Coalition, the Standing Rock Water Protectors, the Shut It Down Today Tar Sands Pipe Valve Turners and Documentarians, and our Children's Trust, state and federal cases against the fossil fuel industry, what do they all have in common? Moral standing in the fight to keep fossil fuels in the ground and to rapidly and justly transition to renewable energy sources in order to preserve this precious home of ours. We look forward to carrying on this fight with the council and the city manager's office into the next year through specific policy-related actions, including keeping the triple bottom line of environmental, equity, and economic impacts front of mind with all council-related decisions, including greenhouse gas assessments for the urban growth boundary and transportation systems planning. And to our outgoing representatives, thank you, Councilor Brown, for your quality of thought and dedication to our community, particularly with environmental concerns, and to Mayor Piercy for showing up, for always showing up and being so passionate speaking out about climate change. And for inspiration to continue our collective fight, let us turn to the literary arts for a moment. I'd like to read a poem by Wendell Berry, one that's been popping up all over social media of late for its healing spirit. It's called The Peace of Wild Things. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world, and am free.